Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to look at foundations of behavior, the concepts of behavior tonight. We've got an activity that you'll need either your computer, your smartphone, or you can use one of the Chromebooks from the university. So it'll be a Padlet. I don't know if you guys have ever done anything on Padlet before, but it's really easy. I already got the stuff up there. You just have to click on it. And when we get there, we'll walk through it to see. So today we're going to talk about what is behavior. And so this is the vocabulary for this lecture today. So basically, we need to understand some words. We often use words different ways for different purposes, but for this class, we're going to try to understand what a behavior person that works with behavior for students deals with. So we're going to identify our define function because we talk about functional behavior assessments, we talk about the functions of a behavior. We use the functions a lot, and this word a lot. And what function means is what is the purpose or the reason for the behavior. So when we get later into I've got a little video of Rain Man, it's a movie about an individual with autism, and we'll watch the video and we'll try to interpret what the function of that behavior is for Rain Man. A behavior is, we need to determine what a behavior is because, and I've got a video that we're going to watch here in just a moment about how we as behavior analysts define what a behavior is. We use what is called the dead man test to define a behavior. If a dead man can do it, then you've really not defined a behavior because dead men don't engage in purposeful behaviors. Sitting in a chair. Could a dead man sit in a chair? They could be put in the chair and then sit there. So you've got to define the behavior more thoroughly. And in this video, we'll talk through it. The third item that I want to further define is stereotypical behavior. Very often, you're going to deal with kids, let's say kids on the autism spectrum, kids with ADHD, kids with some specific learning disabilities that are neurologically impaired. They engage in behaviors that are called stereotypic. And what those are behaviors that are repetitive or ritualistic in movement. Like you've seen kids with autism spectrum, they flap a lot. And that is a behavior that is stereotypic. It could be also they do their hands a lot like this. They might constantly smell things. That could be a stereotypical behavior. It could also be a posture or it could be an utterance, something that they say that helps them reduce their stress. It can take multiple forms with different people. I should have defined this. We talk about the function of the behavior, not the topography of the behavior. And I needed to put topography up here. Topography means what the behavior looks like. So kids can engage in the same topography of behavior, what that behavior looks like running out the door. Kids can run out the door. But what's the function of that child's running out the door behavior? Two kids run out the door, could it be different functions? Purposes? Very likely. A kid could curse out loud in class and throw a book. Could it be two different functions of behavior? Exactly. So that's the topography. So even on stereotypical behavior, the topography of the behavior could be similar, but they have different functions and different purposes. So that's really important for us to kind of think those pieces through and understand what the functions of the behavior are. Let's see if I can click on this. That's not going to do it. Never figured out how I could just click on put a link in and go to a thing. So we'll just have to do it this way. Okay, so we're going to watch a video that talks about understanding what behavior is. This is a behavior analyst. This person that's speaking is a behavior analyst. Applied behavior analysis is the most documented and evidence-based strategy for behavior. When we talk about positive behavior supports, we talk about the three-tiered model, those kind of things. It all came out of applied behavior analysis. And so that's important for us to think. So this young girl is going to give us see, everybody's young to me. This young person is going to give us a definition of what behavior is for a behaviorist. All right.
Hi, my name is Heather Francisco, and I'm a board-certified behavior analyst for Brettinovi & Associates. What actually passes as a behavior that can be objectively defined, accurately measured, and easily observed? Does your target behavior pass the dead man's test? This is something important to think about and ask yourself when deciding which behaviors to actually target while working with a particular learner. Those in the field of behavior analysis use the dead man's test to determine whether or not the behavior being emitted can actually be considered a behavior at all. The dead man's test was first developed by Ogden Lindsley in 1965. He stated that if someone who is deceased can exhibit the behavior, then it is not a behavior and does not pass the dead man's test. Essentially, only living organisms have the ability to emit behavior, and in order to measure a behavior, it has to pass the dead man's test. The dead man's test came about as a response to many teachers who were using very loose measures regarding the behaviors they were targeting. For example, teachers were tracking duration of on-task behavior, when in reality, time on task was just students sitting at their desks and not necessarily attending or engaging to the task at hand. Another example would be minutes without a tantrum. What was the child doing when there was no tantrum? Because technically, a dead man can also not emit a tantrum. One example that a lot of us use in daily practice is noncompliance. Your definition probably says something like this: failure to comply with the demand within a certain amount of time. Can a dead man fail to comply with the demand? The answer is yes. This is just some food for thought to make you think about how you define your target behaviors, especially next time a teacher tells you that a student is being not.
Give me a second. I realized I wasn't sharing my screen with the folks that are, I need to share my screen. So I will share my screen, guys. There we go. Share. And now I'll go back a little bit. And we'll get started with this video again.
Comply with the demand within a certain amount of time. The dead man's test came about as a response to many teachers who were using very loose measures regarding the behaviors they were targeting. For example, teachers were tracking duration of on-task behavior, when in reality, time on task was just students sitting at their desks and not necessarily attending or engaging to the task at hand. Another example would be minutes without a tantrum. What was the child doing when there was no tantrum? Because technically, a dead man can also not emit a tantrum. One example that a lot of us use in daily practice is noncompliance. Your definition probably says something like this: Failure to comply with the demand within a certain amount of time. Can a dead man fail to comply with the demand? The answer is yes. This is just some food for thought to make you think about how you define your target behaviors, especially next time a teacher tells you that a student is being non-compliant and that they would like to target this behavior. A behavior that is similar that would pass the dead man's test might be active refusal. You could then define what refusal looks like, including things that only a living organism can do. An example of refusal might be responding with a vocal protest of no or similar variation when a demand is placed. One downside to the dead man's test is that behavior analysts have widely accepted it without first critically evaluating the behavior. Even though this test was first brought to everyone's attention in the mid-60s, this is something that still does not have much empirical data to support it, according to Critchfield in 2016. However, the biggest hurdle for evaluating the dead man's test is that the reasoning behind it is somewhat circular. The dead man's test associates behavior with being alive, and anything a dead person can do is not considered behavior. So alive equals behavior and dead equals not behavior. This brings us to the next discussion that all behavior must be observable and measurable. Yes, things that a dead person can do also can be measured, so behavior analysts need to be careful about which target behaviors they are choosing to observe and measure. Behavior analysts need to choose socially significant and active behaviors. So instead of saying a student who is not doing one's work, it could potentially be changed to talking during a non-contextual time instead of doing the expected task. Additionally, this behavior must be defined as such objective, clear, and concise. In doing so, you are more likely to have success in your behavior, passing the dead man's test. Arguments have been made in favor of the dead man's test, given that there are many observable behaviors that a dead man cannot perform. For example, a child yells help when he needs to open the door. Another example would be throwing the ball across the yard. Based on our own personal experiences, we can probably correctly assume a dead person will not be doing any of these examples. These examples suggest that we can evaluate the dead man's test by taking frequency data on how often a living person emits these behaviors and how often a dead person might emit those behaviors, according to Critchfield and Shu in 2018. Chances are the living organism is going to emit those behaviors at a much higher rate than a deceased one, if at all. In most recent years, some preliminary studies have been conducted to evaluate the dead man's test. A study by Critchfield and Shu again in 2018 found that when observing 3 different organisms that were considered to be deceased, the behaviors being measured, sitting up and head turning, did not occur. Therefore, a dead organism cannot emit the same behavior as someone who is alive. The study demonstrates support for the dead man's test, but there still is not enough empirical evidence behind it. Potential future research should focus on the behaviors and the terminology that is still widely being used today. This may include aggression, non-compliance, property destruction, on-task behavior, attending, absence of challenging behaviors, or loop. Each one of these target behaviors could be put to the test to determine which ones would actually pass the dead man's test. Thanks for watching.
Okay, so what did you guys, let's talk about that for a second. What did you learn from about the dead man test? What's the whole important piece about the dead man test? Would the dead man test be a valid thing for us to, when we're working with kids' behaviors, to kind of look at that and say, if the dead man can do it, then it's not a behavior. But we have to do what to make sure that that behavior is not just something that's passive. What did she tell you? You must operationally define the behavior in such a way that it's about a behavior that you can actually see the student doing. So, like if it's student engagement is what you're trying to assess. Is the students engaged in something? Is just sitting in their seat, doing stuff at their table, is that engagement? You know, I mean, you've got to think this through. You've got to be very specific about what the behavior is. So when we're looking at behaviors, to help them change behaviors and modify behavior, we have to be very specific. And so that's where we'll get to later today in today's class. All right. So moving forward, now that we have some kind of vocabulary to understand, we're going to talk about these foundations of different behaviors today. Now, this might seem to be a repeat from SPED 3613, but we're going to go in greater depth with each of these elements for this class. Okay, so the very, very first foundation is that all behavior is learned. So I'm going to make a blanket statement as a cognitive behavior therapist and a cognitive and applied behavior analyst. I believe that all behavior is learned. So what does that mean? How do you learn something?
By seeing.
Okay, seeing it. Okay, but is that really, did you see it? Can you really, what does learn mean? Okay, applying it, applying knowledge, applying a behavior, doing something. Let's take a baby. You know, when, and I have a new grandchild, so I haven't bored you guys with pictures of Finn yet, but I will. Somewhere along the line. So we're watching Finn. He's 3 months old now, and he's starting to make more language sounds. And so you know how kids, they babble, kind of like that, right? And all of a sudden, they just put two sounds together that sounds like a word. Da, da. Let's just say that. So they're babbling away and going, da, da. So what does mom do when she hears that? She gets all excited, grabs the phone, says, Finn, you just said da, da. Cool. And what does the baby do at that time? He's going, you know, doing all this stuff and making all these other noises, da, 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 da. And then mom says, get the camera, take the video, say da, da, and he says da, 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 da. And then he gets into that and saying da, 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 da. And she calls and FaceTimes grandma and says, look, he's saying da, da. And then FaceTimes daddy and says, look, Nathan, he's saying da, da, you know, those things. So that's what's going on. So the baby goes on and says da, da, more and more. Over time, the mother doesn't do that anymore. The keeper doesn't do that anymore. And so he starts saying, I didn't get all this attention, so I'm going to start saying something else. Mama. What happens then? Same thing, right? And you're just going nuts. So those are things. It's interesting. What is that behavior of the mother? What is that doing to that behavior of the child? It's increasing behavior, correct? Okay, so all behavior is learned. It's what the process is, I believe, and it's substantiated by research, is that it is through a process of reinforcement and punishment. Okay? So we have a whole process of reinforcement and punishment where we learn behaviors. So let's see if I can do this without having to turn the camera off. Okay, so reinforcement. Let's define reinforcement. What is reinforcement?
Doing something to encourage the behavior.
Encourage the behavior, okay, so let's say, I'll give you the clinical definition, that's exactly right, but let's use the clinical definition. It increases a behavior. That is the clinical definition for reinforcement. So it increases a behavior. That's the whole purpose of reinforcement. Now then, let's think about this. So if reinforcement increases a behavior, what does punishment do? What's the purpose of punishment? To decrease the behavior. Okay, so you've got reinforcement that it increases behavior. Now that's what the mom was doing, right? And then, was punishment ever used in it? No, it was just increase a specific behavior. The more the babbling sounds, it sound like words. All right, so now then, we have to look at another piece. I'll write it on this slide, maybe it'll be easier. There are two types of reinforcement and two types of punishment, okay? We have positive and we have negative. And I'll tell you right now that each of us have a bias, or we have a biased interpretation of what positive and negative mean. What do we, when we hear the word positive, what do we tend to think? Good, right? And when we hear the word negative, what does it mean? Bad. So we have good and bad. Well, I want you to strike that from your vocabulary for behavior. Positive and negative don't mean good and bad in behavior. What positive means is to apply. So positive means to apply. Positive means to apply something. If positive means to apply, what does negative mean? To remove or take away. So let's put them together. What is positive reinforcement? Let's use positive. It means what? To apply something to increase your behavior. What does negative mean? Negative reinforcement is to remove something to increase a behavior, right? We tend to think negative reinforcement, we equate it with punishment. We tend to think, well, that's a negative reinforcement, but it's actually, we're saying that's punishment. Wrong. I'll give you an example. We know what positive reinforcement is. It's Pavlov's dog, right? We give it ring the bell, give them a meat powder, they salivate. Eventually, they pair ringing the bell to salivating because they paired the meat powder. So the bell becomes the reinforcer for the salivation. Okay, so negative reinforcement is When you guys lived at home, when you were in high school, did your mom ever nag at you to clean your bedroom?
Never.
Right? Okay. So your mom would nag, and it's an aversive thing to be nagged at. And what happened if you went and cleaned your bedroom? Did your mom stop nagging about cleaning your room? So it increased your cleaning the room behavior. The nagging is a negative reinforcement. When you went and did it and it was removed, it increased the behavior. Your alarm clock in the morning is a negative reinforcer. It negatively reinforces by you turning it off, you get up out of bed, most likely it's actually, and you hit the snooze. It's actually negatively reinforces hitting the snooze button. But that is a negative reinforcement. The telephone ringing, you remove the sound to answer the phone. It's a negative reinforcer to answer the phone. See, it's not a punishment. It doesn't decrease behavior, it increases behavior. So just like we have with reinforcement, that we have two types of reinforcement, we have two types of punishment. We have positive punishment and we have negative punishment. So positive punishment is what? To apply something to what? Decrease a behavior, correct? Good. Negative punishment is what? The choral thing. To remove something to decrease a behavior. Timeout is a perfect example. When my kids were younger, I never put my kids on timeout, I put things on timeout. If they argued about the TV went on timeout. If they argued about a toy, the toy went on timeout. So, but it was removing something to decrease a behavior, the arguing behavior. Example of positive punishment is hand to butt to reduce a behavior, like running in the street. You're applying something to reduce a behavior. So that's the kind of things that we look at. All right, so let's look at a couple videos. I love Big Bang Theory. I did.
Are you finished? Well, thank you.
I want you to watch here and I want you to pay close attention and tell me what kind of things going on. Is it reinforcement? Oh, let me pull this down. Is it reinforcement or is it punishment? And if it's one or the other, is it positive or negative?
How thoughtful. Would you like a chocolate? Yeah, sure.
Thanks. Oh, sorry, Sheldon, I was sat in your spot.
Did you? I didn't notice. Have a chocolate.
Thank you.
You're here a lot now.
Oh, am I talking too much? I'm sorry.
Thank you. Chocolate?
Yes, please. Oh, hey, Kim. Yeah. You know what? Hold on. Let me take this in the hall.
Okay. I know what you're doing. Really? Yes.
You're using chocolates as positive reinforcement for what you consider correct behavior.
Very good.
Sheldon, you can't train my girlfriend like a lab rat.
Actually, it turns out I can.
Well, you shouldn't.
There's just no pleasing you, is there, Leonard? You weren't happy with my previous approach dealing with her, so I decided to employ operant conditioning techniques, building on the works of Thorndike and B.F. Skinner. Yet by this time next week, I believe I can have her jumping out of a pool, balancing a beach ball on her nose.
No, this has to stop now.
I'm not suggesting we really make her jump out of a pool. I thought the bazinga was implied. I'm just tweaking her personality. It's sanding off the rough edges, if you will.
No, you're not sanding Penny.
Are you saying that I am forbidden from applying a harmless, scientifically valid protocol that will make our lives better?
Yes, you're forbidden.
Bad, Leonard. You know, using positive reinforcement techniques, I could train that behavior out of her in a week.
No,
If you let me use negative reinforcement, I can get done before we go to bed.
you're not squirting her in the face with water.
No, of course.
So that's the bazinga of Big Bang Theory. So what was, so think about it. What were the chocolates? Were they positive reinforcers? They were positive, increase their behavior. And if you notice, it was given immediately after the behavior was there, and it was consistently given. That's called a one-to-one correlation schedule. Do it that way. But that's how you start. The squirt gun thing, that's an inversive, that would be a punishment. But if you're afraid to get squirted, that would be, it could be used as a negative reinforcer because you're doing the behavior to not get squirted. Does that mean, see, it increases the behavior? Or does the appropriate behavior to by removing the reinforcer. All right, so let's see, I think I had one more that was there.
It's school. It's open. It's online. Not getting to see you with a pigeon ping pong comes to mind. We can snap a rubber band on our wrists so there's no get sight.
I'm sorry, it's not, the sound's not coming up. But what they do in this one, they're trying to get their job done. So they thought they were going to use negative reinforcement techniques to put tape all over their arms. But I wanted to show how easily we mistake punishment with negative reinforcement. They used it in an inappropriate way. It was actually punishment, not negative reinforcement. So I'll give you the link. You can watch it in your free time. Terrible sound on that. So it's interesting, you know, these pieces. We get it easily misconstrued. Okay, so let's go back there for a second to this whole concept of all behaviors learned. What do you guys think? Does that make sense that all behaviors learned? Or do you think that there's any behavior that we engage in that is not learned through a series of either punishers or reinforcers? It seems like, you know, it seems pretty simple. And then then as time goes on, we use operant conditioning things, life just throws things at us to teaches us things to be the punishers or reinforcers of our behaviors. What we like, dislike, those kind of things. We do something well, we get approval, we get attaboys, and then people, that's what we choose to go down that path. You know, so those are all the things that we look at. So all behavior. Now then, if all behavior is learned, what does that mean for you guys as teachers? Can you then help a child unlearn a behavior and learn a new behavior, a replacement behavior? See, it's so powerful is that behavior management is actually teaching the individual how to choose correct behaviors. That's the power of it all, that they have all the control. You guys have no control. They have all the control. And I'll tell you some really cool stories as we get into the year, how I used that particular concept to really engage kids into their behavior management. So it's very interesting. All right, so now then, we need to understand that even though all behaviors are learned, there is a specific purpose for all behaviors. And just because a behavior looks exactly the same, the topography of the behavior, it doesn't mean it has the exact same function for two different individuals. It could be very different. So function is the purpose of the behavior. So we need to really understand that all behavior serves a function. And in all reality, let's look at it all, we'll create a chart. When we look at all functions of behaviors, they can boil down into two lifelong functions. There are only two functions of all behavior. It is to get or obtain, and it is to escape or avoid. And then we look at things like social mediated stuff, and we'll get to those later in the semester. But in all reality, it's two things. It's either to get something or it's to avoid something, escape something. So when we start looking at all functions of behavior, we need to really get down to knowing, is it to get something or is it to escape something? And then when we get it down into those two categories and know which one it is, your behavior management strategies are based upon these two things. If you know a student throws a book across the room and screams and yells out to get a teacher's attention, are you going to engage that student differently than if they're trying to escape reading a chapter? Are you going to engage with them differently? Absolutely. So for example, let's take this. A student who we know doesn't like to read out loud, you ask them to read out loud, it comes to their turn, they throw the book across the room, yells and screams, and you tell them, okay, fine, Billy, you go to the office. And you send him to the office. And he sits down in the office, he doesn't get any attention, he just sits on the bench outside waiting for the principal to talk to him. What have you just done? What was the function of his behavior? We know he didn't like to read. So was it to get something or to escape? It was to escape. So by sending him to the office where he's not having to do any work, not talking to anybody, what have you just done as the teacher?
You assisted him in escaping. You assisted him in escaping.
I said it one more time.
You assisted him in escaping.
Right. So let me see if I got this right. Sometimes I have trouble hearing. So you positively reinforced his inappropriate behavior of yelling and screaming and throwing the book. Because you've reinforced him by going to the office. You removed his negative reinforcement. See how that worked? So you were reinforcing his behavior. So what happens next time you say, okay, class, we're going to read out loud today. What is Billy going to do? Is he going to do it wait, or is he going to do it right then? It's good. Yeah, see, it's actually making his behavior worse. And then you send him out of the office to the office. So who's at fault at making this child's behavior worse? The teacher. Because they're not choosing the right process, right? So now that we know this, then we can do something different. If it was to escape, we say, Billy, if you don't want to read out loud today, here's 5 cards, and you have 5 times in a month to be able to choose not to read out loud. So we're going to do that, but then later you get with him and teach him the reading skill better, and then he can escape without doing the negative stuff. You're teaching him a replacement behavior. It's kind of the get out of jail free card for Monopoly, you know? So that's the thing, is that we look at how we can interact with these kids and see how that would then be a way to teach them a replacement behavior to appropriately escape, but then would still then engage appropriately in your expectations of the classroom. See the difference? It's really kind of funny how that all works, but that's the power of knowing what the function of the behavior is when we look at these pieces. So let's look at another video of functions of behavior, a function of a behavior. And I want you guys to watch the video, and I want you to tell me, after we watch the video, I want you to talk to your socially distanced neighbor about, was this to get something, to escape something? What was it? What was the function of the behavior? Okay? Hopefully the sound will work on this one.
When people fly out of airports, what do you think we're doing? This plane is very safe. I gotta get you don't know? Is it this airline? Yeah. Is it this airline? Okay, fine. And there's an American plane. American Flight 65 crashed April 27th. You want to take a reckon, there's a lot of things. Yeah. On that one fact, Flight 7, 13, it's very serious. You see, I have to get to Los Angeles, right? So you're gonna get on that plane. You understand me? You're gonna have to get on the plane. Yeah, get on the plane. There's a building there. It's a good idea, you know, they don't, I don't feel they don't that hard stuff. All airplanes, all airplanes have crashed at one time or another. It doesn't mean that they are not safe. Qantas. Well, that's going to mean a lot of good. You see, Qantas doesn't fly to LAX. You gotta get to Melbourne. Melbourne, Australia, when you get the plane, it flies to Los Angeles. You hear me? Let's go. It's very okay. And I gotta get on this fucking plane. No. He's okay, he's okay.
Okay, so what do you think the function of that behavior was with Raymond? What was he doing? He was telling his brother, have you guys seen this movie? This is an old movie, The Rain Man. Excellent movie. Dustin Hoffman did a great job. He's on the autism spectrum, and what was he doing? He was telling his brother all these facts, right? And his brother wasn't listening to him in a way to appropriately address his needs, because if he heard those, what would he have said? Well, let's figure out a different way that we can travel, right? But it was all that, and then all of a sudden he realized that didn't work. So what did he do? He screamed and yelled and started hitting himself in the head, self-abusive behavior. Inappropriate behavior is effective and efficient because it is so out there that it gets exactly what the person wants quickly. So we've got to come up with a plan to diffuse that and come up with a way to get them better behaviors that serve the same purpose and function. And for him, it could have been, we could have taught him things that actually I don't want to fly because I'm afraid. Teach him that skill. But he didn't know how to use those words. So behaviors communicate those behaviors to other people. So this was one situation, another situation where the function of the behavior was such to avoid. So that is so now can we see how that can be completely different? We've given examples of kids that maybe somebody wants attention, they tell inappropriate jokes in class, which might be for some kids to not have to do a task, but it might be for some kids to get attention, right? So that's the whole piece about all behaviors serve a function. Every behavior that we engage in the world, all our lives, has a purpose. And just because I say this question all the time, and somebody said, well, worship doesn't do that, worship doesn't, and I'm a believer, so I'm going to go there for just 1 second. This person was saying worship is not, doesn't get or doesn't avoid. It said it does, it's to obtain. It's to obtain peace. It's to obtain the presence of your maker. It's those things. So I have yet in my 34 years of working as a behaviorist to find a behavior that doesn't fit into one of those two categories. Interesting, isn't it? And if you think about it, you'll go, those are the things that make you go, And if we know the function of the behavior, I tell you, guarantee it, it's going to make our job a lot easier as behavior specialists in the long run. So that's very important for us to understand that element there. Huge, huge piece. Makes our life easier. Makes your relationship with others easier too. Hint, hint. I mean, that's the way you can help yourself out sometimes. All right. Now then, the next foundation of behavior is that the environment has an impact on an individual's behavior. And individuals' behaviors have an impact on the environment. We could take an example. Let's take the whole summer, the stuff in Seattle and Portland, where they had all the craziness going on up there. The mob rule thing, when mobs get together, it's almost like it's like a brush fire. One negative thing happens, then everybody joins in. It's just a mob rule. That's a human dynamic. And it's kind of like, you guys have done this in science class where you pour water into a cup and it's over the cup. Have you seen that? Where the water is over the cup because the tension on the water is not letting it pour outside the sides. But if you go over and you touch that tension, the water, what happens? It goes all over the place, right? Same thing happens in mob rule. And that's the environment has an impact on the behavior, and then behaviors have an impact on the environment. So it's an interesting thing. So, like, for example, do you guys get stressed when you have to go to Walmart? Especially around 4 or 5 o'clock in the
The
afternoon, when
parking lot does it for me.
all the crazy people are in. It's so interesting to me that when we're going to Walmart and I'll start hearing kids start crying and yelling out and doing different things. And my wife would say something and said, actually, the kid's overstimulated and can't handle this. And so it's really the environment's causing them to have negative behaviors. All you have to do is just decrease the stimulation and children are fine. Yeah, that's the thing. But it's interesting. It is a behavior management plethora of stuff. It causes stress. First of the month is that's kind of an environment. Paying bills, that causes stress. You know, there's a lot of things. Those are environmental pieces, and we need to look at how behaviors and stuff. I worked in a psychiatric hospital for youth, and it's very interesting is that kids would work up the level system and get to a level where they could go on home visits. They would leave on Friday afternoon to go on a home visit. Friday morning or Thursday night, they would do something inappropriate to get the levels up so they didn't have to go on a home visit. What is that telling you? There's an environmental piece. They don't want to go home because they're afraid they're going to have trouble. They're scared to go home. But that's the same thing with your kids. You have kids that come to school, and right about 3 o'clock, they might start acting up so they don't have to get on the bus to go home. That'll tell you a lot. And if it happens every day at 3 o'clock, there's something to tell you right there. Also, let's say it's passing periods and kids are getting bullied in the passing periods. And right before the passing period, they do something to have to stay in class until the bell rings again, and then you let them go after passing period. That's the environment, right? We have to know those things. It becomes really powerful for us to know those things when we have kids in the environment where they're about 11 o'clock, they start acting out. If you give them a snack, they stop acting out. And then what could happen? 11 o'clock, do you think they might be hungry? That's an environmental play. So we need to know those things. So let's watch this little video, another Big Bang video. Hopefully, again, the sound will be better.
in school is no place you have to be. Or go to school where remote learning can be as remote as you want. Want to sit down?
Oh, I wish it were that simple. See, I don't spend much time here, and so I've never really chosen a place to sit.
Well, choose.
Yes, there are a number of options, and I'm really not familiar enough with the cushion densities, airflow patterns, and dispersion of sunlight to make an informed choice.
All right, why don't you just pick one at random, and then if you don't like it, you can sit somewhere else next time.
No, that's crazy. You go ahead and talk while I figure it out.
Okay. Here's the thing. So I've known for a while now that Leonard has had a little crush on me.
A little crush. Well, I suppose so. In the same way Menelaus had a little crush on Helen of Troy.
All right, yeah, I don't really know who they are.
Menelaus was the brother of Agamemnon.
Listen, the point is, Leonard isn't the kind of guy I usually go out with.
Leonard is the kind of guy anyone usually goes out with. Would you be open to rotating the couch clockwise 30 degrees?
No, what I'm saying is, Leonard might be different in a good way. Obviously, my usual choices have not worked out so well.
The last one worked out well for Cooper Polly. He got a free iPod. Oh, glare.
But on the other hand, if things don't go well with Leonard, I risk losing a really good friend. I'm guessing he's not looking for a fling. He's the kind of guy that gets into a relationship for, I don't know, like you would say light years.
I would not say that. No one would say that. A light year is a unit of distance, not time.
Thank you for the clarification.
Draft. You see, people hear the word year and they think duration. A foot pound has the same problem. That's a unit of work, not of weight.
Right, thanks.
It's a common mistake.
Not the first one I've made today.
Okay. I think this will be my seat.
This might.
So if you guys know Sheldon, he has to sit in his seat, right? That's kind of a stereotypical behavior for him. So new environments cause him to be what? Distracted, etc. It's not an ADHD. It's a sensory thing that he needed to a stereotypical behavior. So that environment had impact on him, but it also had an impact on his behavior. Also had an impact on fitness, right? So it's funny. There's another one where he was trying to find a seat in the theater, and he'd go around doing these really loud noises, trying to find a sweet spot in the theater. I have friends like this.
Now, I've never watched Big Bang Theory, but does it say if Sheldon has like a brain disability?
Well, watch little Sheldon, young Sheldon, and the old. Nobody said, but everybody felt that Sheldon is on the spectrum.
Gotcha, okay.
And it's funny is that you think, but he's on the very high end of the spectrum, way over there, what we used to call Asperger's kind of behaviors. You know, that's all just high functioning autism over there. I really believe we're all on the spectrum somewhere on the spectrum along the way. We all have sensory stuff. We all have weird idiosyncratic behaviors, etc. But no, but we all talk about it. Nerds. Most interesting thing is that towns that have high engineering jobs, they have more kids on the autism spectrum because engineers tend to be like that. Like, gosh, I can't even think of her name now. Well, when you look at the people that are high, very vocal, high in the spectrum, it's like that. But their behavior problems because it's problematic for them. They don't get along in society. So those are some issues. All right. Used to love Big Bang until it got really weird at the very end. It got strange. I didn't watch the last few seasons. Okay, so that's environment impacts the behavior. So that's another elemental piece. Now, skills deficits impact problem behaviors. This is a really important thing for you guys to consider. when we start doing behavior management and doing an assessment, one of the things that we need to find out, do they have the skill in their repertoire of social skills are to engage in appropriate behaviors or not? And so we need to determine if that behavior that they're engaged in is it a skills deficit where they don't have the skill, or is it a performance deficit where they have the skill and they don't want to do it? Completely different things, right? If you have the skill to read and you choose not to read, that's a performance deficit. But if you don't have the skill to read, you can't read, that's a skills deficit. Now, here's the interesting thing. If we determine a student needs training on a specific skill, how's our behavior management plan going to be? Is it more about teaching a specific skill and practicing that skill in the environment where you see it? Or are we going to do behavior management and use reinforcement to increase the skill that they don't know how to do in the first place? How can you do that if they don't know how to do it? So you have to teach the skill. It's just like an academic skill that they don't know. If they can't add and subtract, what are you going to do? Teach them, right? So if their behavior is a skill that they don't know how to do, we need to teach them. And we teach it in the same way we do with academics. We teach the skill, direct teach the skill. We have guided practice in that skill. Then we have them practice that skill independently. And then we assess if they did that skill, right? And what happens if they didn't? And the assessment showed us that they weren't able to do the skill. What do? We reteach, right? So it's exactly the same way that we teach an academic skill. So it's important that we understand that. So that's the whole thing about skills deficits impact problem behaviors. Let's see this little video.
I think if we work with kids in general, but challenging kids in particular, they need a philosophy. Who is this kid? What's he about? What's he up to?
I'm sorry, the sound is just terrible.
Because
I will give this is in the PowerPoint also. And when you get a chance, it comes down to this guy in the lecture, he says, kids will behave if they want to. And that's a very important thing. If they have the skill, they'll behave if they want to. They'll not behave if they don't want to. Right? So we need to make them want to. And that comes from relationships. We'll talk about that in just a minute. So again, you can watch that on your own leisure. It might be better. This room doesn't really provide good sound. So skills deficit is a foundation piece. And social skills training. Most of our kids that are cognitively impaired or on the autism spectrum are sort of have a neurological piece like ADHD or some of the LD kids. You're going to have to teach skills and generalize those skills into new environments for them. And that's going to be real important. Another piece is that the team approach is critical. This is where we think about that nobody has the full picture of a child. Nobody. It's like, have you guys heard the story of the blind man and the elephant? You had 10 blind men. They were asked to describe an elephant. So they all climb around the elephant. And then after a few minutes, one blind man says, the elephant is like a wall. Another one says, an elephant is like a snake. These were African elephants that had the big ears. An elephant is like a big leaf. An elephant is like a big trunk of a tree. Are they wrong? No. Each one has their perception of what their experience is. But if we put it all together, an elephant is like a big wall with tree trunks, with it like a snake, like a leaf, etc. We have to be a team to appropriately address the needs of kids. And so that's an important piece. So that's a really critical element here. Team approach is critical. So it's important for you as a teacher to get to know what the previous year teacher's experience was with the child that's having behavior problems. And if they weren't, then you find out what were you doing to help them to be successful? What happened from that year? Those kind of things. It's important. And finally, the best behavior management tool, its foundation is relationship. Kids will behave for people they have a relationship with. So develop the relationship with the hard to develop relationship with kids. That's the best thing you can do. Find something that you can talk to them about. So if they're into, I don't know, what's Minecraft, is that the thing currently? There's, what was that game that has a fox? My son was talking about it. He's a 5th grade science teacher, so he does all this stuff with them all the time. He's really got a whole group of kids playing Warhammer, which is a role-playing game, and they really developed. And they're the worst kids in school, but yet they behave for him in his class because they have a relationship. So he's kind of he's listened to me all my life, So it's kind of one of those interesting things. So relationships matter. That's a huge deal. So we need to understand those elements of those pieces. All right, so let's go ahead. I think it's time. Let's take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 10 till 6. Does that sound good? I mean, I've blah, blah, blah enough for right now. And it's hot in here. So we'll see you guys in 10 minutes. I'm going to pause. Resume share. All right, so all right, so now then we're going to learn how to operationally define behaviors. So remember from the beginning, we started talking about the dead man's test and how that you could determine if you don't appropriately define a behavior, then you're not going to get the outcomes that you're wanting. So it's really very important that we be able to define behaviors appropriately in such a way that we can see them and we can measure them. So that's an important piece. They must be observable. And when you write up the definition, the operational definition of the behavior, it must be clear enough that somebody walking down the hallway, you tell that behavior, tell that definition to them they can come in and they can observe that behavior. So that's important that we do that. So it must be observable and must be measurable. So let's look at some vague descriptors and then some operationally defined descriptors. What happens as a behaviorist, and often and you guys are going to run into this because when you get into schools, people that aren't trained in behavior, they're going to give a lot of vague descriptors. And you probably hear it all the time. People saying that Chad is lazy. Well, okay, can you observe lazy? It depends. You can operationally define it, but is lazy a positive term or is it a negative term? This you can use not plus or minus, not a one or two, but it's not a nice term. If you're said you're lazy, you don't like to be called lazy, right? So lazy is a negative term. It's emotionally laden. And so when we ask for descriptors, we get this all the time. So this is a real descriptor, and a teacher wrote this on Chad. He's just the laziest boy I know. And that's what she gave to me as a descriptor of behavior. So I went to her class and started talking to her and said, okay, I need to know exactly what you mean by lazy. And so she said, well, on average, after we talked for a long time, she said, on average, he'll turn in one assignment out of 5. Now, is that lazy? We don't know if it's lazy but we do know that he's not getting his work turned in, right? So can we observe this better and easier? Absolutely. Does it take away the negative connotation and emotional lability of these words here? Yeah. So this is one that we would use. See how that is clear. You can observe it. Anybody what I give it to can observe it. The Chad turns one assignment out of 5. We have a measuring device, a frequency. We know. So that's an important thing, is that is a operationalized descriptor. Susan is mean. What does mean? You know what I mean? Oh, I'm punning on you. There you go. But the thing is that that's, again, mean has a negative connotation, has a negative impact. But if we say that Susan makes derogatory comments to peers, that's nice. It was very, when I had this, it was a lot of vulgar words, so I cleaned it up. But you're stupid. Those kind of things. But you can see that, and it has the same intent as saying that Susan's not being nice to people. So that's you're operationally defining it. Here's another example. Thomas doesn't care about school. But if we say Thomas is absent an average 2 days a week, but we still don't know what the cause is of that. Maybe he's sick, maybe his mom's not getting up and taking him to school. We don't know. Sorry, I get it. Everything goes to my hearing aids. So my son was calling me. I don't know why he called me. So Thomas is absent an average of 2 days a week. That is an operational described behavior, right? Vague, Manuel doesn't play nicely, but he's grabbing toys away from peers. That's more operationally defined. So what we're going to do now is that we're going to go to Padlet, and what I want you to do is find a neighbor that's appropriately distanced neighbor. I want you to go to Padlet. I sent you this link in in an email. And what we're going to do is that I want each pair of you guys to come up with a operational definition of these vague descriptors of behaviors, okay? So stay at a social distanced area. If you need a Chromebook, they're over here. We're going to take, let's say, 20 minutes to do this. And then we'll share out, okay? So find a partner or a pair. Remember to stay appropriately socially distanced so you don't trying to engage in group activity without getting you guys sick.
See if you actually email I don't get.
Yeah.
Yeah, never mind. Just, yeah. I just double check.
Do we just say it or do we just type it?
You can click on it and you can type on it. So when you click on the box, you just click on the box. You can expand the post. You should be able to. Huh. Let me see if I,
Who? That's my Right. Okay.
okay, so see when you hover over it, there's a little, you can click on that and you can edit there. See how it's done? See the little, does it show up for you guys? Well, never mind.
More action.
I'm trying some new technology.
I think it's complicated too, because Dr. Litt tried to use this a couple of times last semester, and she would always have to go in on the day of and make it like editable or something.
I did. I see visitors can write.
No, they're going out. I think she's gonna be out.
Let me see.
Oh, yeah, you have one.
Now, let's see if it works. See if you guys can do it now.
Yeah, edit.
I did put edit, so you can,
Just delete every post.
huh?
Okay. Now we can edit it, right? Okay. We're- That was what you said.
Yeah.
Just how the food example. Okay. Dawn is engaged. I think we're just supposed to read words.
Oh, we're supposed to make it more operational.
Measurable.
Measurable.
We're good? Yeah, that's what we're doing.
Gotcha, thank you.
Mary is
Yeah.
That's the same thing.
Yeah, I'm close enough. I didn't know what it is. I don't think everybody can type it.
I don't know. Again, I'm trying new stuff. so- Probably not. It's not like a Google Doc.
Okay,
And so I used to.
there's like people.
I'll go back to using Google Docs. Then everybody can get
Hold
into
up.
it.
Yes, Mark is engaged.
I like Google Docs. This is kind of fun.
Let's just read it 3 times and see what- It's 4 left. No, that's not ours.
That's all. I know who the troublemaker You know, it's like the term inappropriate and provocative. I use provocative all the time. My kids say, Dad, you're just being inappropriate. So you use provocative because it means sexually provocative. I said, no, provocative means to provoke and respond. Right? So when you're provocative, you're provoking.
Yeah. You know,
Recess, yeah.
Stephen learned about 11,000.
Really?
Look at my best that he's got. That's like it. $200 million deck. I might have a better chance on that baby. Motion.
And I don't probably know where that's on. We're after trying to find it. But-
Maybe March.
Yeah.
I'm expensive there. There's a place by mine. It's just good, so sure. It's over by, you know where the Chico's is?
Yeah.
Entertainment market is over there. Across the street, but it's like a little center, there's a place where it goes, that's where all
Yeah. Just a little hole in the wall type thing.
Yeah, my dad bought a 308, I'm like, 300. Yeah, I think he was talking about Mark is engaged in stereotypical behavior. We elaborate on that. Something like that.
I think
Have you seen Lloyd
Good game.
All right, Jay. What you there? There you go. I don't know, barely. It looks
Mark is a werewolf.
Those three little toes.
Are we in Harry Potter now?
Oh, that was George. Oh, yeah. Too much Harry Potter, huh?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You gotta have fun.
Mark is actually Professor.
There you go. All right, good. I like you guys. I enjoy hearing you guys talk. Let's look at these. Let's look at these real quick, because I tell you, by the end of the semester, we're going to be much more clear about these. And you've got a good start on this. You're starting to get, but then the thing that gets crazy, let's take this one for an example. John is disruptive. John threw a book at his teacher yesterday during math. Well, that just tells you they threw a book. It doesn't give you a lot of information, right? And that might have been, was it one time? Has it been consistently happening? Those are some things that we need to know, but purposely I was vague with the behavior so we could kind of go there. We're gonna start with something. And so we're gonna work through these, but these are really good. It's what you did is that you look at these, non-compliant, Betty used to work independently. Excellent. See, anybody can read that and know it and can observe it and can measure it and go from there. So as we move through the class, we will learn how to do things, take a case and develop a behavioral statement. Then we'll develop a hypothesis about the behavior, why the behavior is doing, why they're doing that behavior. And then come up with a behavior plan based on those things. That's the progression. Define the behavior, hypothesize, and develop a plan. All right, so good job. I enjoyed the conversations. Hopefully you guys stayed socially distanced appropriately. Okay. So this is where, after you've chosen the behavior that the target behavior. So again, I'm going to define some terms for you guys. We have target behavior is the behavior that we want to change. So that way we'll be using the target behavior is, and then it'll be we need the definition of that. What the behavior is you wish to change. The replacement behavior is the behavior you want them to engage in. Okay? So that's important. So if the target behavior is the behavior we wish to change, we need to have it operationally defined. The replacement behavior is what you want them to do instead of, and we need to have that operationally defined. For example, this is not very clear, but Lisa gets out of her seat too often. That's the target behavior. The replacement behavior, Lisa will remain in her seat during instruction. So we'll expand on those pieces as we go through the semester. Target behavior, Joey breaks pencils when he's frustrated. Joey will request a break when he feels frustrated. That's the replacement behavior. Sean talks out in class without raising his hand. Sean will raise his hand before speaking in class. That's the replacement behavior. So we'll talk about how that goes, how we get there, how we learn those pieces, etc. How we teach them, etc. Okay? Data collection. Now this is interesting. I want you to think about a behavior management activity like you're doing a research project. It's a pre and post research project. So we need to have baseline information and collect data on the baseline. And then after we have the intervention, then we're going to come up with a post-intervention analysis. Your baseline and your post-intervention analysis are going to use the same process that you use to collect data at the baseline. That way you're talking apples to apples, not apples to kumquats. Okay? So for the type of data that we have frequency. Frequency is the number of times something occurs. Now, frequency is really good for like low frequency behaviors, like maybe out of seat or talking out, yelling out in class during instruction time. Those are good for frequency. But frequency doesn't work really good when you're doing a thing like clicking your pen. Does that drive you nuts? I'm a pen clicker, and it drives people nuts. It's just because it's my little anxiety thing I do. But can you count all these? Would frequency be good for this? Or tapping your pencil? Can you count all those? Doesn't work, right? Because it's a high frequency behavior. We want to do duration. How long are they clicking their pen? Or how long are they tapping their pencil? Because it's high frequency, duration works better for that. How long something occurs, right? Also, for very low frequency behaviors like out of seat, you might want to do duration. They're out of their seat one time, but they're out of their seat the whole day. See what I mean? Duration wouldn't work so good. But, I mean, frequency wouldn't work so good, so you want duration. Johnny's laying under his table with his head covered by his coat. One time, for 15 minutes or 20 minutes. We want duration. So that's important. Latency is the teacher's most important piece. What is latency? Latency is when the teacher gives an instruction, it's the time after you have finished the instruction to the time the student engages in the activity that you want them to engage in. That period of time is the latent period. How do you want a short latent period or a long latent period between your instruction and them engaging? Long or short? Short as possible, right? So if a kid takes 15, 20 seconds to start engaging work, that's a problem, isn't it? He gets himself in trouble, starts disrupting others. So you want to shrink the latency piece. The latency is after the instruction, that time between when the instruction ended and they begin the activity. Intensity is just that, how loud. Billy hit Susie so hard that it left a red mark. That's intensity. Susie was screaming so loud she sounded like a ambulance. I mean, you want to have how loud. So those are important. And then you, after the intervention, then you collect the data using the same piece so you can know if there was a change or not. Okay? So you do the operational definition, collect baseline on that operationally defined behavior, and then the way the research would work is you intervene and then see if there was a change in behavior after the intervention. If there wasn't, then you need to do something different. If there was, then you're good to go. So I'm going to be really, really nice because I'm tired of talking and blah, blah, blah. And you guys try to hear me blah, blah, blah for this today? No, you're too sweet. But I would really like to get into the ABCs of behavior more thoroughly with you guys next time. And so I'm going to let you guys go today because I feel like that you got enough information to let it consolidate this evening. And next week, then you can apply it to the ABCs of behavior. Sound good? All right. So who guessed at 6:30 you're going to get out? All right, guys, we're done for the evening. Thank you very much for attending. I will post this online for you guys, okay? All right.